What's good, YouTube? Steph here. Welcome to Theta Space. Talking jazz this time, I'm covering the self-titled album by the fusion group Continuum. I can't tell you much about this band. Information on the internet is even more sparse than about King of Kings, but at least I did find their official website at weebly.com, and I'll link that in the description. It includes a brief history of the band, their 3-album discography, and review quotes, and a bunch of video links. So I found this album purely by dumb luck. Back in the mid-90s, I was browsing at the Tower Records on Hawthorne Boulevard in Redondo Beach. I was probably in the jazz section. It might have been something by Al I was looking for, which would put me in the D's, and over in the C's, I noticed this record. The title caught my eye because it's the title of my favorite Jaco Pastorius track from his 1976 solo debut. So I picked it up to look at the backside of the package, and I might have put it back down and not thought of it ever again if I hadn't seen Barf on the Ghoul by John Bergamo on the Trek list. That was a piece I knew from when I was a music student at El Camino College, and I heard it performed at a percussion recital that one of my classmates played in. It was an ensemble piece with drums and marimbas and bass and guitar, and it had a wild Zappa-esque kind of vibe to it that I really dug. And now here it is on a jazz album by a group I'd never heard of. This is the second of 3 albums, released in 1994, and on this album, Continuum is a quartet made up of Craig Ochikubo on keyboards, Christopher Garcia on drums, Andy Suzuki on saxophones, and Steve Billman on bass. So here we've got I kind of like what they did here. They just have a photo of each member and their name, and just another photo representing what they play. 3 of the 4 wrote most of the material on this album. The pieces by Craig Ochikubo are mellow, pleasant tunes that can be mistaken for smooth jazz if you're not listening too closely. Andy Suzuki, the sax player, tends to write more outside tunes with syncopated rhythms and more intricate and challenging melodies. Steve Billman only has 1 track on this record by himself. It's a relaxing tune with a long bass solo, but he also co-wrote tracks with Ochikubo and with Suzuki, and the result tends to be what his co-writer would produce by themselves. Also, the aforementioned John Bergamo wrote 2 of this album's tracks. Bergamo's a percussionist, and his writing style in these 2 tracks are reminiscent of Frank Zappa's fusiony instrumentals with asymmetrical meters and complicated melodies that are even more outside than Andy Suzuki's compositions on this record. Listening to it again to prep for this review, I noticed the album starts with a reserved accessible track by Craig Ochikubo, getting more wild and adventurous with each following track until it hits kind of a peak. And then it goes back to reserved and accessible to begin a second build-up sequence. So in this vein, the album opens up with Ochikubo's Nascent, starting with piano, bass, and drums for almost a minute and a half before Suzuki comes in on sax. As I said, this can sound like smooth jazz to the casual ear. There's a nice fretless solo by Billman on this track, and I think Nascent is a great title for this one, particularly because it's the opening track, and we have the album itself is just coming into being and beginning to show its potential. I'm going to take this opportunity to say I like a lot of smooth jazz. I'm not a fan of Kenny G, but I really do like Brian Culbertson, Keiko Matsui, Althea Renee, Reagan Whiteside, Paul Hardcastle, Cindy Bradley, a bunch of others. I went to see Brian Culbertson last month here in Salem. My smooth jazz Pandora station gets a lot of play at work because it's pleasant to listen to and it doesn't demand a lot from the listener. I'm not really a saxophones guy. My favorite lead instrument in jazz is the piano, and then the flute. Trumpet and guitar are in close competition for 3rd and 4th place, and saxophone would be probably my 5th favorite instrument, if that. Personal aside, on to track 2, Waltz for Igor, which is a Billman-Suzuki collab. It starts with the bass repeating the main theme for a bit, which is a melody that reminds me of Berenger's Nightmare No. 2 by Herbie Hancock. And suddenly the whole band comes in with this Zappa-like outburst of notes, and it settles into the groove, which, as the title might indicate, is in a triple rhythm. The chorus part's more of a bebop groove with a walking bass line and more legato sax lines, and the sax solo break is almost pure bebop. The 3rd track is Suzuki's Pretty Maids, an up-tempo number with the sax and piano melody lines getting even more intricate than in the previous tracks. The album sequence hits a peak with track 4, John Bergamo's Barf on the Ghoul, which, as I mentioned, was what enticed me to buy this record. Track 4 is pretty intense, so it makes sense to follow it with a mellow Ochikubo track, and that's track 5, Paths. That's followed by Suzuki's Maskable, which, despite the relatively fast tempo, is actually a pretty reserved track for Suzuki. Track 7, Billman and Ochikubo's Somewhere Else comes next. The main theme is kind of mellow tune typical of Ochikubo's writing, and it's contrasted by a more dynamic chorus with an active bass line. Track 8 is Nick of Time by Billman and Suzuki. Fast tempo, syncopated staccato melody line, busy bass by Billman. It's a Suzuki track. Billman's Inspiration is the 9th and longest track at nearly 8 minutes, although a couple of others are almost as long. It's another mellow cool down to follow the frenetic Nick of Time, and the album closes with another Bergamo tune, Foreign Objects, which is only a minute and a half long. So I'll admit that I can't talk about jazz with much authority. I used to listen to records with my dad, mostly the likes of Dexter Gordon and Rahsaan Roland Kirk, which was great stuff. When it comes to jazz, I'm pretty much all about bebop and fusion, and while I know fusion is a subgenre of jazz, I don't really hear the jazz in stuff like Mahavishnu or Return to Forever. It's more like instrumental prog rock to me. That shows how much I know about jazz. So while I do think of this as a fusion record, it's very jazz forward. There's no mistaking it for rock, and it's really quite good. There's a good variation in the styles of the different writers, a variety of moods, and the way the tracks are sequenced gives the album a really good flow. They're all good tracks. Of course, I like some better than others, particularly in the front half. But this is a record that I'll let play all the way through with no skips. On a 10 scale, it's a 7 for me. It doesn't blow my mind, but it is really good. So anybody else heard this band, particularly either of the other 2 albums? The discography on their website tells me the debut album, You Tell Me, had guitar instead of saxophones, played by Al Garcia, who I assume is Christopher's brother. I never looked further into this band at the time, and now it seems these albums are pretty hard to come by. Let me know in the comments if you have anything to say about this group, and while you're at it, smash like if you up. Also, please click subscribe and hit the notification bell. They don't cost anything. And I'll see you next time. Steph out. Peace.